Hello and welcome to another episode of A Wicked Parley. I'm your host, Justin, and today, or tonight, I should say, I bring you a new co-host.
It's morning somewhere.
Indeed. And of course, there's always the lovely Rose.
But yes, we have special guests today.
Yeah. So, first I'd like to introduce everyone to Katie, who's represented by the badass Raven with sunglasses. Katie is someone that I have met who has a wonderful insight into various aspects of psychology and other sorts of lived experience, which I think would be an excellent addition to the show. And so hopefully you guys welcome her and her voice, and we can see her contribute to things in the future. Welcome.
Thanks. Twiddling my thumbs right now, but thank you so much for having me on, and I'm excited to see.
We're happy to have you.
Yeah, of course.
Fantastic.
Let's go.
All right, and I'm sure that those people who watched last week's episode and knowing about the Wheel of Challenge are eager to find out what results happened this particular week. Okay,
Steam, nothing but steam.
Yeah, so just for you guys who didn't watch, this particular month has been, the Wheel of Challenge was hot showers. And oh my God, they were scalding.
Every day.
Every day. It's not good. Not great.
This is getting to the point of danger.
Kind of. I mean, like my back of my skin and my hands are extremely dry afterwards, and they kind of have broken out into bloody sores. So I will say this though.
This is a challenge where it might have to end early. Not gonna lie.
Maybe, but I'm gonna try to persevere. I will say this though, it is the weirdest feeling in the world to suddenly be like very awake and then very sleepy, like right afterwards. It's like and then. it's a strange experience, I gotta say. So hot shower so far, it does not seem to be, you know what it is? It's relaxing and scalding, if that makes any sense. I went to go to get my mail one day, like right after I had taken one of these showers, and I was like, I looked like I was a Super Saiyan, because like there was just like steam coming off my entire body as I'm walking around.
Yeah.
That's something, I gotta say.
Yeah.
Are you guys planning on doing like cold showers next?
It is on the wheel.
Yeah, so if you want to throw up the wheel real quick to see like kind of the options that are there.
I'm gonna have to pull that up real quick then.
Okay, that's fine. In the meantime, yeah, so basically the Wheel of Challenge is how it works. So at the beginning of every single month, we basically spin a wheel and a specific set of challenges appear. Those challenges can vary dramatically based upon what's there. The things that are there are going to be suggestions from people who have watched the show, who email the show these particular suggestions, or suggestions we came up with along the way to kind of fill out the slots. And each of the particular suggestions have to have a psychological bend, an effect that they have on the person. And so they have things like cold showers, no adult entertainment, taking one themed picture every day, no junk food, waking up at 4 a.m. every day, no video games, no internet/social media, which is difficult without, every dish cannot have a specific ingredient.
Every dish has to have a specific ingredient.
Yes.
I feel like that's the hardest one.
I know, right? Like
every dish has to have a
unless you eat
ingredient.
the same thing. Yeah.
Oh, I couldn't do it.
Like we have wheels for those as well.
Yeah, those have their own independent things. So
It's fun.
Yeah, that's just gonna be like oh my God. See, if it lands on fish, I'm fucked because like I'm gonna have tuna for like every day. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna be like sick of tuna at the end of the thing. I'm like, tuna this, tuna that. It's like, nah.
Tuna supreme.
Anyways, that is the Wheel of Challenge for Katie's benefit as well as our viewers. So today we're going to be discussing authority. I mean, who's excited to talk about authority? I mean, I'm pretty excited. Authority's cool. Don't be all excited all at once, people. Jesus.
How freaking dare you.
And when it comes to talking about authority specifically, I think it's important for you to understand specifically where we're coming from when it comes to authority. So I would like to present the Merriam-Webster's definition of authority and specifically pertaining to what we are actually saying. And so, Rose, if you wouldn't mind throwing up the definition, and I'll go ahead and read the definition. And while she's waiting to put it up, I'll just go ahead and read it anyways. It's essentially, the definition is power to influence or command thought, opinion, or behavior. Now, this particular definition, I think, is important to kind of pertain strongly, at least it's the first one, A. And I think it pertains specifically to the elements of authority by which we are going to discuss certain talking points, particularly pertaining to the influential part on people's behavior and the commanding of opinions, because those two elements are the things that are most intersectional across multiple lines of thought. What are your thoughts on that, Katie?
Well, certainly, I think it's probably the most important type of even power. I mean, in humankind, right? I mean, if you could convince someone to do something for you or change their mind or their behavior, I feel like that can cause a lot of, ripples that eventually lead to bigger and bigger change.
I completely agree with that.
That's just how we, do it.
Fair enough.
And Rose, do you agree with that as well?
Yeah, because having the ability to convince somebody of something, if you can convince somebody of something wrong, like, how much else can you convince them into doing something, like, terrible or bad? Or, like, some people could use it for good, and there's some people who are going to use it for bad.
Exactly.
And the more power you have to, like, actually command these things and have them not question you or not have the ability to question you, kind of terrifying, not gonna lie.
I completely agree with you 100%. Yeah. All right. Well, let's kind of shift gears for a second here, and let's pose a kind of a basic question. Why is authority important? And Rose, why don't you go ahead and take that one?
I think authority is important because it's kind of, you have to also keep people in check, but it's also important for the authorities to have somebody keep them in check.
So you're saying kind of like a balancing act?
Because it's like, yeah, people want to take command, and sometimes you do need leaders, such as, group projects or development projects, because otherwise we're going to have a bunch of chickens running around with their heads screaming. So somebody does need to take charge, but so therefore they are going to become the new authority, but you can't just become the authority willy-nilly, in my opinion.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, I think I only
the way I see it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Go.
The way I see it, like just like you said, you need authority in many cases, such as projects, and to me, I see it as more of like at least it should be ideally kind of point of grounding, to where you look towards the authority and then you go on and do the tasks. It should be like a space where you're able to like collect information and then come out of it knowing what you're doing and being confident in what you're doing. Like it shouldn't be necessarily, it shouldn't have a negative connotation necessarily.
Yeah, I totally agree with that as well. I mean, I think authority in general is kind of an unnecessary evil, but I think the way in which authority conducts itself, the way in which we perceive authority, the way in which we interact with authority, I think that is something that maybe society could do a better job on. Just as a thought, there is a quote that I think is kind of important that talks about authority, and that is, if you want to see someone's true character, put them in a position of power and see what happens. Some people become tyrannical. like the small man, the person who thinks that they're stepped on all their life suddenly gains all this power and authority, and suddenly they use it to basically, impose the same bits of suffering they experienced on others as a way of feeling better about themselves. But then there are some people who do the exact opposite.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of interesting. So there is a famous study that I'm sure Katie's aware of, and honestly, I think even Rose is probably aware of this one too, because we've talked about it before.
I helped write an essay.
Yeah. It's the Milgram study, which of course most people are very familiar with. The Milgram study, for those who are not, it was a study that was designed to understand the reasons behind why certain people will listen to a person in power and how far that person is willing to go in regards to potentially mistreating others based on the idea of authority. Now, the study was broken into a couple different of participants. There, of course, was the teacher. The teacher was the person who was the authority figure. Then there was the learner, right? And the learner was supposed to articulate a certain set of commands. If those commands were failed, then the assistant, we'll say, would then press a buzzer and would institute a type of electric shock, perceived electric shock, to the person who's learning. And that person would, every time they got a problem wrong, they would have to increase the amount of shocks given. That is the gist behind the Milgram study. Katie, is that more or less how you remember it?
Definitely. I remember watching so much about it during one of my classes, and I really specifically liked the videos about it, where, you know, the guy, well, the learner is sitting in another room.
Yeah.
But he's really an actor, and he makes these, like, you know, screams, and it just sounds so real, and that's insane. I can't imagine being a participant.
Job for the reason.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, it's insane.
I mean, can you imagine the debriefing afterwards? Are you kidding me? He was an actor this whole time.
He's like, hey, he's like, you sure? I didn't hurt nobody. He's like, you sure? You promise? I'm about to hurt you now.
Yeah, we'll get into this a little bit, but I will say that there was an ethical concern over this because there was trauma in inducing effects where people were getting minor levels of PTSD and anxiety surrounding the participation in this particular study because they some of them genuinely thought they had caused harm and damage, and that had affected them emotionally, where they were having a hard time going to sleep and whatnot. So I know that when they repeated the study a few times, the APA, the American Psychological Association, they kind of they tweaked the study a little bit by reducing the level of shocks, so that way hopefully it would reduce the trauma that would be induced. And there was some ethical concerns also associated with it. But we have a small clip where you guys can kind of see a little bit about what the experiment kind of looked like for those whom basically didn't get an opportunity. So let's go ahead and play that video.
Stanley Milgram, an American social
30
psychologist
seconds
at Yale University.
Pause.
The second
30
of
seconds
three.
in.
What?
30 seconds into this is where the clip begins.
Should have mentioned that then.
Oh, I did, but don't worry about it.
No, it's not.
Boring assigned tattoos. His bar mitzvah speech reflected his family's experiences and what the Second World War's effect would have on the Jewish people. As I find happiness in joining the ranks of Israel, the knowledge of the tragic suffering of my fellow Jews makes this an occasion to reflect upon the heritage of my people, which now becomes mine. I shall try to understand my people and do my best to share the responsibilities which history has placed upon all of us. His unarguable...
So, yeah, I think we have the wrong clip, actually.
This is the one that's got pulled up?
Yeah. So, the clip that I have on the document is 3 minutes, 39 seconds. And it starts on that point, too. Anyways, to kind of
the secondary one.
Oh, weird. Anywho, so the main concept of this thing I wanted to kind of showcase is essentially the reaction between the people who are asking, "Are you sure that this is what I should be pressing and whatnot?"
Yeah.
So
told to provide prompts or orders to the teacher to continue the experiment. Much like a Nazi soldier, if they showed hesitation whilst aiming down the barrel of the gun, they would be prompted to pull the trigger. Some people horrified at what they were being asked to do, stopped the experiment early, defying the experimenters' urging to go on.
I would totally do that.
Others continuing,
I would
and
not do
dealing
that.
what they
Yeah, I
Yeah,
would.
I'd just be like, nope,
Yeah, I
no
would.
thanks.
Yeah, I would be like, nah. Like, I feel like that, like,
You can't pay me
especially,
enough for this.
yeah, especially considering like the types of sounds like the actor was making. Like Katie, like you were talking about, like how like they were screaming and stuff like that. Oh my god! Like I would be, if I heard the first time I heard something crazy, I'd be like, nope, we're not doing it anymore. I'm sorry, nope.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to say now when you're, sitting in your
It's
cozy
like, oh, yeah.
room.
Yeah.
But, like, imagine being actually there and having this figure of authority, right? Standing over you.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
just don't even know what I would do, honestly.
yeah.
I'd like to punch them.
Well, I don't really have a qualm about like stepping up and standing up for like like certain things. I'd be like, no, this is wrong. I'm not doing it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we can kind of continue this for a little bit, I think, roughly.
thought to be a horrific pain towards the other participant, even
feel
with
bad
the
for
sound
this
of
particular
disturbing
guy.
responses from the learner in the other room.
This guy
Some
felt so
took
bad.
it really rough.
Yeah, he would literally like
Yeah.
he'd press the button and like he'd be like, "Oh God, I'm sorry," like he like just hesitantly like pressing the button several times as he had to go up there.
Yikes.
Yeah,
He looks like he's suffering.
Mhm.
yeah.
Let me out of here. Let me out of here.
Continue, please.
Ethics were brought into question regarding
Goodness.
the stress endured by the participant administering the shocks.
Go ahead and pause
You
it
can
there.
see it.
You can see it from his body language. It's
He's
just
like,
like,
no, I don't want to.
Yeah,
I don't want to.
his arms are hanging down. And just like he's got this look like, "Are you? I can't believe what you're asking me to do here." Oh my goodness.
Absolutely insane.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to a couple of the questions I want to kind of like pose to see how you guys think about these things. I guess first and foremost, Rose, how influential do you think the results of the Milgram study were? Like, do you think to like the scientific community and to like general research in general?
I think it would at least give some insight as to how much power they, as the overarching people in charge of projects and experiments, had.
Mhm.
Probably at least a look into the ethics and policies, as they did with the APA on the modern take.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like, if this is how far they could push people then, how far can they push people to try and figure out, what they're researching?
Mhm.
For some people who actually do have morals, it's kind of an eye-opener. For people who don't have morals, it's an eye-opener in a more negative connotation, I think. Ugh.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that, Katie?
I actually was thinking about this because I'm like, was this study really even necessary? Because, I mean, we see what happened
Mhm.
during the Nazi regime and how, many people actually caused real harm,
Mhm.
And more to, real people. So, I don't understand. Like, part of me kind of understands why they wanted to kind of simulate that in a safe kind of environment, like a lab,
Mhm.
but also I feel like due to kind of the ethical issues with it and the fact that many people were given, I'm sure like, anxiety or, maybe even like,
Mhm.
post-traumatic stress after that.
Mhm.
I feel like maybe it wasn't too necessary to conduct. Yeah,
I
don't know.
wonder if there was a difference between, why they would be studying it out of wartime versus during wartime.
Mm.
Maybe they were questioning, like, if there was a difference of how far somebody would be willing to go. But then again, my history lessons are terrible. I can't remember dates for the life of me. So,
I can kind of give you a little bit of background if you'd like when it comes to this, which might be helpful in addressing part of the question. I'm not sure if you want.
sure.
Okay. So the first thing you have to understand is that when the time period by which the study was conducted, people viewed government very differently back then in comparison to today. I think that there's a very low percentage in comparison to people in the 50s and 60s when it came to their viewpoint and their trust in the government. People trusted politicians and government officials far more back then than they do today. And so, like, that world viewpoint, it's kind of important to understand why these questions would be important to ask, because with so many people being in agreement with the government, there was, of course, the question circulating as to what exactly is the level of influence that any individual in the public, eye actually has on the people. And covertly, the CIA and a few other government agencies were experimenting with mind control and other things that would happen later in the future. And a lot of this particular research on influence and on the ideas surrounding authority were really cultivated by the just dramatic change in temperament of people who were Nazis or who were complacent during the Nazi regime in comparison to how they were immediately after the Nazis were no longer in power. The atrocities that were conducted and some people were fine with during those points were points of interest and areas of study, because to my knowledge, not very many people had actually studied the effects of authority on a population until that time. And that's the reason why those particular things were there. It wasn't known that, like, by doing an experiment like this on authority, that it would necessarily create trauma. They didn't know that at the time when the study was first conducted. They did know after that when they repeated it, but the first one they didn't know.
It's crazy. Like, it's crazy how now we know. Like, it's so easy to say, like, oh, well, what are you doing? But back then, they had no clue, I guess.
Yeah, they had no clue.
Yeah.
I mean,
Gee, I wonder.
yeah.
Gee, I wonder if we threaten you to threaten another person and hurt another person, what it's going to do to both of your psyches here.
I'm sure they'll be fine.
I'm sure it'll be fine. You're just giving them an electric shock where they scream in pain.
And anybody who's watching this in the future, in the chat, feel free to, like, throw in, like, what you would do in that circumstance. If you were the person who was being told by the teacher to shock somebody, feel free to, send in your message. Or if you're watching now, then you can, of course, send it in the chat live. But in either case, it's an interesting question. It has a lot of connotations. I mean, I've kind of already alluded to this, but, why was the study created in the first place? Now, I kind of gave the answer already, but feel free, either one of you guys, what do you think also contributed potentially, or what could be some of the reasons for why this study would be necessary beyond what I mentioned? Either one of you guys take it.
I don't know. I'm not, like, too sure right away.
That's okay. Rose, do you have any thoughts?
Maybe, like, some insight as to how to either strengthen or dampen the influence of authority, maybe?
Yeah, perhaps, yeah.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah, like how to prevent
Because it's like-
what happened from happening again.
It's like, if you can understand kind of why somebody would go that far, you could potentially take action to prevent or make it such that a situation wouldn't need to exist, maybe?
Yeah, perhaps. I could see that very much playing out. That's totally something I could see. I mean, I can also think
Like,
of
that's
something
just
else.
because, I mean, that's just kind of what it's called, a preventative measure, isn't it? Like,
Yeah,
trying
yeah.
to figure out the why so you can prevent it from happening again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think there's another asset to this particular thing as well. If you can understand how it appears in your population, then you'd be able to use that particular knowledge to actively disrupt other potential regimes that have this particular policy in place. And keep in mind, during that particular time frame, much of the world was under the threat of communism and the rapid spread and changing of policies just worldwide. It was a very unstable place. And because of this uncertainty, having studies like this can gain insight in a very unpredictable, unprecedented world.
Okay.
And I mean, if we can circle back, we'll circle back to it if you come up with anything, Katie, by the way. Don't feel like you have to answer it.
I know I've just left a question to the wayside, like, I can't, I don't. No, thank you.
essentially, when we talk about authority and we talk about the studying of authority, there are lots of questions that can kind of come into play. And one of those questions that I think is kind of essential to talking points is that the way we conduct studying, like authority's influence on people. And so I'm curious to ask you particularly, Katie, how would you, if you could create an ethical study that used, something that would be considered safe, is there a particular thing that comes to mind of how you'd conduct it without causing harm, like in the Milgram study?
I mean, that's a really difficult question.
I agree.
Because you have to really always keep those, rules in mind and try not to cross any boundaries. It's just kind of that, that's kind of the question on my mind this whole time, because I see how this was done and how similar studies were done, like the Stanford prison experiment, and other, I'm sure, other little similar types. And it's on the one hand, it's you don't want it to be too safe, right? Because then how are you going to get your desired results?
Yeah.
But then at the same time, you don't want it to be awful and actually, dangerous to your participants, especially in the long term. So I can't really give you an exact question of how I would conduct a study like that.
Sure.
Yeah.
When I was in junior college, I was interested in conducting an experiment of sorts. It was a light experiment. It wasn't a super detailed experiment, but the general idea that I was trying to explore had to do with the temperament of people. I wanted to know if people were happier in early morning classes or if they were happier in later in the evening classes. And so what I did when I was doing this little study was I would be at the door of the class, sitting down in a desk, and as people would come in, I would greet them, "Good morning." And every person who said good morning back, I would put a little notch, saying essentially that they were, positive, they were happy. And I would put another notch for the people who wouldn't respond, who had a temperament that seemed to be perhaps perturbed or indifferent. And I collected this over the course of some time until the study was disrupted. But I think that, to me, if I was going to construct a study surrounding authority, I think I would probably put it in an academic setting where authority is already predetermined. The expectation of authority is there, but I would do it in a very subtle way, so that way people wouldn't be directly affected. So I would do something akin to maybe having a teacher assign a innocuous assignment that didn't really make sense, right? Something simple, something that took up maybe a minute or less in time and was repeatable across all of the students in the class. So that way you had kind of a diverse sample, and then repeat the experiment multiple times and see how many people put something that was nonsense and how many people put something that was serious. And because you have that perception of authority, you'd be able to sample that particular thing and be able to extract certain viewpoints from it. That would be my approach to finding a way that would be potentially not harmful, but still be able to give you some insight.
I'm curious, what was the kind of verdict of your little experiment?
To be fair, I wasn't able to complete it. About halfway through the experiment on the morning side, the professor that I had objected to me performing this experiment without the consent of the class.
Oh.
And
that's interesting.
And because of that, she threw a whole big old stink. And let's just say, to make a long story short, I withdrew from her class without having anything happening on my academic record. Okay. She was shortly fired afterwards. And
all the things to throw a stink over, it's just keeping track of good morning.
Yeah,
literally.
It wasn't like I was doing it. I didn't ask anything else.
It's the least harmful thing, and it's so it's just so nothing's happening.
Yeah, literally, I didn't even write down names. I wrote down.
It was just tick marks.
It was literally little tick marks, and it was just all I had was the day and the tick marks and the fact that it said morning, and I repeated this exact same experiment in one of my night classes. The night class professor didn't care. I told the professor after the thing had happened that like what had happened, and the professor told me that's ridiculous. Were you asking for any information on these people? And I go, no. Were you intending on sharing this information with anyone for like profit or anything? I was like, no. Well, then there's nothing here. You know, like there's nothing. You have no names. You have no like signifiers. You don't even have gender. You know, like it's not
like there's nothing personal. It's just like I'm pretty sure if you were just counting. Well, granted, you have a good memory, so you probably actually did remember who was who. But for me, I'd be like, who the heck was who again?
Well, to be fair, I actually don't remember their names. Like I can remember their face. Right?
Okay.
And I can remember things, but like their names, like I'm terrible with names. So like that's my fault.
All the things that I stink over.
I know, right? Like
For real.
Yeah, but I would say like if I were to base like half of my results, what I effectively think is that people were seemingly more happy in the morning than they were during the evening. I think it might have to do with coffee. You know, like caffeine seems to have this kind of uptick when it comes to response times. And I think that like coffee's effects kind of run out around the time my night class began. It was like around 6:30. So
I'm thinking a combination of coffee and anybody who happened to have a morning job.
Yeah, maybe it could have been that. It could have been a lot of factors. You know, like that's the thing about the thing. It was an incomplete study. It was also my first foray into something like that.
Fair enough.
So
I'm curious as to like if it depending on the semester too, because if you said it was like a 6-7 o'clock class, you know, depending on the light levels too, because I know in winter I'm just as soon as it gets dark I want to sleep.
Well, this class was not a class you would want to sleep in. It was quite energetic. We had a very lively professor.
All right.
So it was. I think it was an interesting thing, and I thought it was fun to get that. But anyways. But that gives some insight, perhaps, into some ways you can approach that. Katie, if you have any thoughts on this, feel free to like share it in the future. You know.
Cool.
Yeah, no worries though if you don't have anything. Sometimes I'm just like, I don't know, I'm not sure. We're gonna move on.
Yeah. Feel free to go. I'll like interject if I have any comments.
Gotcha. All right. Okay, so my next kind of question is that the influence of an authority figure in the decision-making ability of an individual often goes through a couple of different steps. Sometimes people perceive things through knowledge that goes beyond common sense, which sometimes elicits complacency to certain tasks as a kind of like a response. Do you think that the type of authority figure, i.e. specifically pertaining to whether or not that individual is coming across as assertive or passive, is going to influence or elicit that specific compliance, like to any tasks that are like necessarily given?
Definitely. I mean, if you're more passive, or let's just say if your boss is more passive about something, and if you yourself have a bit of a different maybe temperament, or you care more about what you're doing, then yeah, you'll definitely, you can make some little changes here and there despite what they say. Or, like work around things and maybe not necessarily like follow all of their rules, but if somebody's like really like strict about it, I think it's definitely gonna influence you to maybe not work around them as much and follow along.
I could see that. I mean, like in the response, perhaps from like the Milburn study, the teacher is kind of like speaking with like a very loud tone. And although we didn't get the clip per se, know that like anybody who was watching this, the teacher has like a very loud like do this kind of like attitude, and I think that it kind of automatically triggered this idea of, okay, I'm going to do this anyways because this loud voice is telling me to.
It wasn't like feel free to do this and that. It was like it is imperative that you continue.
It's like okay
that you continue this mission.
Yeah.
I mean, like definitely like especially like the language they use, for instance. Like it elicited because of the, we'll say, educated, kind of like lofty, larger words that kind of describe certain things, and the mission oriented language, it almost elicited the response without you even if you weren't compliant, you were going to do it anyways.
Exactly. Yeah, it's so fascinating, honestly.
Yeah. Here's kind of like a hair, like, random question. Do you have any idea or any thoughts on why that might be?
I think people tend to really look up to and listen to people who are seemingly, whether or not they actually are, like, more educated. I don't know. Just kind of this instant, not charisma, but like they're able to feel, or like, how to say this, like seem more like valid just because they're so and so, rather than some like, commoner.
You're like, screw this random person off the street. I'm not going to listen to him, but this person who speaks to me very nicely, I will, of course, listen to.
Yeah.
One's perception of other people type of scenario.
I mean, that kind of reminds me of like the reason why Hitler got so much power. I mean, Hitler's a horrible person, but I mean, you can't deny the fact that that guy had a tongue that people just wanted to listen to. He spoke with authority and gravitas, and he spoke about things that people in that time period cared about, and so he was able to get like a following. I think it's kind of analogous to some ways in which Trump speaks. It's kind of like that. I hate the guy, okay, but like you cannot deny the fact that he has a large following of people who would just do anything he says.
Yeah, and he is a phenomenal speaker, and he's actually like, I don't like his, politics and stuff, but he is funny.
Yeah,
I can't deny it. Like, the guy is kind of funny when he was just like a rich guy appearing in movies.
Yeah, I mean, I hate the fact that like he speaks in such a way that manipulates people who are, we'll say, not as exposed to certain forms of language. Like his way of gesturing things is like, I am the best. Of course I'm the best. Look what I've done. I'm the best. I'm the greatest ever. Of course, because I did these things, and because I did this, it was great. It was great. America's great. America's great. Go ahead and do this. Everything's great. It's like he repeats himself. He speaks in circles. Often it sounds like somebody who's just like, I don't know, like gonna go die in the corner.
Somebody needs to eat a cactus.
Yeah, I know. I don't know. Like, I'm not a fan of the guy, but I also can recognize someone who's able to utilize his influence and his authority and his privileges to manipulate a group of people to do his bidding, as it were. So yeah, I think it's kind of important to connect those kind of concepts because they are definitely kind of like important. I do want to briefly mention one thing. We're gonna go into a few other random questions. We'll see how many we get through. But I do want to say that on Patreon, we are going to be discussing a little bit more in depth the Stanford prison experiment. Due to the guidelines on YouTube, I am not able to express in the way I would like the full totality of the study and its implications. So if you are interested in hearing the entire story, it will be published at some point by the end of this month on Patreon. Of course, welcome to join Patreon. You can join it as little, I think, as 50 cents or $1. I'm not sure what that is.
I think it's $1 or $2.
Okay.
No, I think it's $1.
It's $1. And so if you want to join Patreon and support the show and hear a crazy story and see other cool content, please feel free to join. And if not, then continue to watch the stuff and subscribe if you haven't.
Like, comment, and subscribe.
Yeah.
Show your friends. Let them join the crazy circus.
Shameless plugs. Shameless plugs. All right.
Hit that like button.
Oh, yeah. Hit the like button. Yeah, don't forget to hit the like button.
Subscribe.
Yeah. Okay, so obviously I think we can agree that there are many different kinds of authority. There's parental, governmental, hierarchical, and families pertaining kind of to age or workplace, religious, spiritual. Do you think that there are any specific elements of authority that you particularly connect with? And either one of you guys can take this one.
Definitely family-wise for me.
Okay. Why is that?
Yeah. Because it's just kind of, for me, making sure my parents are happy is one of the things I aim to achieve, keeping them happy. So typically, whenever I'm at home for like vacations from schools and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
it's just kind of doing whatever they want to do
Mm-hmm.
versus like, oh yeah, I want to hang out. It's like, oh, can you stay at home? Okay.
I love that. Yeah, I kind of
Getting
relate to that
dragged
too.
around for shopping.
Right. Yeah. Do you have siblings?
I have one sibling. He is all the way on the other side of the country, and he is 14 years older than me.
Oh, okay. So you're like
I
the
am the
younger
tiny
sibling.
babu. I am the youngest. I am the youngest. I am a female. I am in an Asian household. I have mama bear parents and papa bear parents, and I'm like, oh dear.
Yeah.
I love them, but gosh darn it sometimes.
No, I
But
get it.
I do it to keep them happy, and that is my goal.
Yeah. I wouldn't. Yeah, I wouldn't say I have like a connection to any of these, but like I think we all kind of play a role in each separate hierarchy,
Mm-hmm.
like whether we like to think about it or not. Like usually, like at my work, for example, um, like I have older coworkers. Like
Mhm.
most of the people I work with are older than me, and they I feel like they're able to talk better with customers because of their age.
Mm.
Like, it would seem, for example, it would seem weird of me to be like, "Oh, hey, sweetie, let me get you this."
Oh God.
Oh, whoa, why are you calling him sweetie? Jesus. That's...
He's like, hold up, hold up.
Right, right, you know what I
That
mean.
moment.
Let's put on some old, like old, I guess an old mask or like,
Nah, just get a wig, get
gray
some makeup
hairs.
to put on some wrinkles,
Put on a little mole here and there.
Right, but part of
Start
me,
hunching over.
yeah, but part of me wishes like, well, one day when I am older, I'll be able to like use those kind of words because I think it's really
okay.
sweet. But like, it's just awkward when I'm like at my age.
Yeah.
So, like,
Unless you're talking to like a tiny child.
Yeah, exactly. Hmm.
Let's just hope a little school comes in and you're like, all right, yay.
He's like, oh
Sweeties.
Honestly, like, I do feel a connection to probably most of the things that I mentioned, if I'm going to be perfectly honest, because I can kind of
Fair.
see the way in which all of those forms of structures lend themselves to authority in one way or another. I think particularly for me, I think it's more like governmental, religious, and like workplace where I feel like authority and hierarchies and things like that kind of like take place. So, yeah. But yeah, I think that is kind of an important distinction though, because I think every single person, their lived experience is going to give the expressions that are associated with those particular kinds of concepts. And so, and no one person has the same necessarily lived experience that's going to go, okay, well, you're going to respond this way because you had this experience. Like, no.
Yeah.
I call nonsense.
Well, Katie, I got a question for you. Does the complexity of authority affect the way you view it?
I would say yes. I mean, it could be good or it can be bad, but I would say it depends on how much of, how much privilege you yourself have
Mm-hmm.
that affects like what you do and how you behave in order to avoid negative consequences
Mhm.
from the authority above you. So like, for example, there are many like established authorities that are meant to protect your safety and
Mhm.
rights, such as like the police force, the fire department, even like the emergency room technicians and doctors and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And so when something's happened to you in the past or to people you know,
Mm-hmm.
or even just hearing like stories about it like on the news or something regarding these authorities,
Mhm.
it can be hard to hold your faith in them when you or others have been harmed by them or
Mhm.
wronged, and you're constantly hearing this like stories about like unjust actions, or even like crimes being committed by some of these people with authority.
Mhm.
So due to that, I mean, it is pretty complex because I think like trust factors into it, and so
Mhm. Kind of like with the
it's,
George Floyd incident.
exactly. It's like, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
It's really complex.
you gotta have. I think you're right. There's a lot of complexity there. I mean, like when it comes down to like having like, I like how you like tied in trust to that because I do think that plays a huge role. I think a lot of people don't respond to authority figures unless they respect or trust them. And so I think especially when it comes to certain things, like you're not going to go to a doctor that you think is going to kill you. You know,
Right.
you got to trust them. And you aren't going to call the police if you think they're going to shoot you. And I mean, I don't know, like fire
But then
department,
it's like, but then it's like, what if you don't have a choice? Then it's hard.
I mean, yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that explains a large portion of Los Angeles. Like,
yeah.
there's a large part of that kind of makes me think, yeah, you know, maybe not the greatest parts ever, or certain parts of like, I don't know, Florida. Like, don't hate me, Florida. People from Florida. But oh my goodness.
There's some crazy stuff that happens in Florida. I'm not gonna lie.
Oh yeah, definitely. You know, I mean, like yeah.
Huh? No, go for it.
Okay, like for me, like when I think about the complexity of authority, I also would agree with you and say yes, absolutely. Mainly due to the sentiment that many people have shared with me personally, they've conveyed the ideas of hopelessness about changing aspects of government policy, and they're hopeless about it because often the structures of power are so complex and take so long and so many people are involved that they feel like there's nothing that can be done about it, so they just have to believe that the people who are above them are going to do the right thing. And so they take the assertion that authority is going to be righteous in nature, and I think that that's probably giving people in positions of power too much respect and too much trust. Because if you look at what's happened, particularly in the United States in like the last 10, 15 years, I have to raise my eyebrow and be like, not so sure.
Something's gone a little off rocker.
Yeah. I'm curious about a couple things though, Katie, when you were talking about the complexity element. Like you mentioned trust. And you mentioned like what happens in the scenario, say for instance, where if you are in a situation where you need to call the police, but you feel like you can't. Do you think that there is an outcome, like a solution to that particular dilemma today?
Well, I guess having an alternative would be nice, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, instead of the police, maybe there's another kind of person you can contact.
Mm-hmm. Let me like
That
a
would-
community like security or
Yeah,
something.
something like that. Yeah, something like that, or it's a separate organization that maybe deals with the specific problem that you run into,
Yeah.
rather than the police, who's gonna come in with like weapons and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard lots of things. Like the police, to me, like not to get too side tangent here, but I think the police get overwhelmed with all the responsibilities that they're kind of like forced to have. Because like they have to play the part of the mental health worker. They have to play the part of disputes, between spouses
Right.
and whatnot. They have to worry about criminals. They have to worry about drug dealers and other things like that, or people who are on drugs and who maybe perhaps need help. They come across such a wide variance of different problems and struggles that I feel like many police are just overwhelmed, and as a consequence,
Be very mentally sound and strong in those aspects.
yeah, and as a consequence, I think that they don't get the opportunities to exercise, I think, the best judgment in all situations and circumstances. And so, yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with that notion, Katie, about the idea of maybe having some sort of, other alternative that they can turn to kind of like address that. Who do you think is responsible for paying for something like that?
For paying?
Yeah, because I mean, obviously it's not going to be a free service.
Unfortunate.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Well, it shouldn't be free. It shouldn't be free for or what am I saying? It should be free for the people in need. I don't know, like ideally, like it should be a government.
So you think like a budget of the police department should be like maybe perhaps some of it should be allocated towards funding some sort of extra, like, arm to be able to assist with community needs.
Definitely. Yeah. And very generously donated.
Generously. Well, I mean, depending on where you're at, some budgets are kind of tiny because they don't get that much support.
Yeah, which sucks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to kind of jump around a little bit here, and I want to kind of get into a couple other questions before we wrap up tonight. And I think that the question I want to try to jump to is I want to know, specifically for you, Katie, how important of a role does respect and trust have in regards to authority? Since we've already kind of briefly talked about trust, I kind of wanted to know, what are some of your thoughts about that?
It kind of relates to what I was saying earlier, with regards to complexity, because, like you said, having respect and trust are very big factors when it comes to actually listening to authority and even contacting them. I mean, it feels good to know that the people that are supposedly in charge of your safety and rights are actually doing their job, and that you trust them to take care of what it is, like whatever's going on, without having to even get involved yourself. But when you don't have that respect and trust for your authorities, it can get tense or potentially even dangerous. So, for example, say something was happened, say something happened to you, and you go to the police about it, and you tell them about the situation, you file a claim, and if the level of trust there is very bleak, it's gonna probably doubt, oh god, I get all my thoughts messed up. But say this particular police station in your city or town has had a very bad reputation with processing claims of essay, and you go to them with that, you're probably gonna not be as optimistic about it.
Okay.
Just stuff like that.
So first things first, before I jump at at my response to that, I just want to say this now. If any person has experienced SA, I think that it's important for you to file a police report at your local police department and go to your local court and get a restraining order. If you have a restraining order and a report on file, it's far more likely that you'll be processed and seen by multiple eyes, which will then investigate, rather than just simply going down to the local police department and filing a report. Doing both actions grants more attention. So, if anyone has that experience, please go do that. Do not let the person who victimized you get away with it. Please, please report.
Right. And yeah, of course, no matter how much what you think of whatever the police or whatever, you still should do that no matter what. It's just crazy though how often these issues still continue to come up. I don't know if you're familiar with the arrest of Andrew Tate.
I am. I'm very familiar with the situation.
Yeah, and then Vice came out with the article about him.
Yeah.
Well, about the people that have accused him.
Yes.
Of,
Yeah.
essay.
Essay.
And how, yeah, and how the British police basically have had a very bad reputation for processing those claims or even looking into them, or it's taken them years before they even get back to the people. Meanwhile, the perpetrator is still out there. He
also fled.
free.
He also fled to Romania and lived in Romania for a while. So it's a difficult process to prosecute and basically get him to come back to the country.
True. But while he was still there, I feel like they could have done something.
Yeah, they absolutely could have done something. I mean, I think the human trafficking charges are alarming. I think that him not paying taxes, alarming. And I think his abuse of the people whom he worked with, where he did not pay them, fairly, is alarming. And the whole situation as it unfolds, I think, is going to be a masterclass in this is what you don't do. Yeah, right? Like anybody, but particularly young men should pay attention to what happens to Andrew Tate and should know that the words that he spoke, some of them I feel I agree with because they come from a position of power and authority. And they speak to things that I think are virtuous. However, just because someone speaks something that is true and virtuous does not change the fact that they could be a horrible person and a monster. So, be aware of whom is speaking and who is not, about those things.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But, I genuinely do believe that in what you're saying, what you talked about when you were discussing, the level of trust and if you are potentially, having some issues with authority and say, if you get the example you've given about how if you walk into a police station and it looks kind of like a little kind of, rough, and you feel like there's not enough confidence that your actions, your words are going to be taken seriously. I can definitely understand how that can be, and it's daunting to even report something like that, like SA in the first place. That's the reason why I encourage anybody who's experienced this, like I said, go. Don't just stop at the police report. Go and get a restraining order from a judge, because what'll happen is that you'll get 3 sets of eyes. You'll get a judge, you'll get a sheriff, and you'll get the local police officers looking at that document. And best believe within the realm of law enforcement, SA, while not taken seriously necessarily in front of you per se, because they have to be objective, they do strongly want to find these people and get them off the street. So at least in the local area and the people whom I know in law enforcement, that is a strong position they take. So
Yeah.
Please definitely do those things. Anyone who's experiencing that. There is another question I want to before we end the night. This will be the last question of the night, people. So thank you for staying tuned so far. But I think it's a good question. It might be a little bit long, and that's okay. But I think it's something that's important because we talked about Andrew Tate a little bit. We talked about man a little bit when it comes to that. I think this is important to kind of ask. And the question is, does a woman command the same level of authority as a man in the same position? I'll let either one of you guys take it.
I would say.
I think, go for it.
Yeah, no, go for it, Anne.
I just kind of think it depends on the position.
Okay.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. I think it just kind of depends on the position, because there are some positions where I would probably trust a man to know more than what they're doing than a woman would.
Oh, why is that?
It depends on, background, depending on their background and whatnot, how they've been raised and stuff. If they were raised in the right background, then doesn't matter the gender, but, if they just got the position with, nothing, then there are some instances where I would trust one more than the other. Such as lifting ability.
I see.
I know for a fact that a man can carry, for the most part, an average man can carry more than an average woman. So it's just like, oh yeah, you can lift that. It's just like,
Well, I mean, let's. Yeah, okay, all right. I'm gonna not touch that part of that. We're gonna circle back to that some other day on that part.
Okay.
Katie, what are your thoughts on this?
I'd say it depends, on the, well, when we're talking about positions, then I suppose there's such a thing as a workplace culture. So I think that it would depend how women and men are viewed in that specific culture or community. I can imagine though that having for example, a woman in a position of power that's usually been a man, either in the past or in a specifically male-dominated sector, could definitely cause maybe more I don't want to say shock, but maybe ripples in kind of the culture where it's oh, okay, things have changed.
Yeah.
Like I don't know how to explain it. Or like if you have a man in a position of power in a company that's been mainly run by women, for example, something like
Sure.
that.
Mhm.
Yeah. Like neither of these are bad. Like it's just but I'm not so sure. Like I feel like it would affect the authority if people were perhaps holding some sort of like, bias towards that specific gender. Um, like obviously if the women in the female run company would be like, what the heck do we have a man, commanding this position now?
Yeah.
They may not necessarily be as like willing to follow his rules, and then vice versa.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, in my experience, I mean, my boss is a woman, and then when my dad used to work in kind of like a catering or like a food thing, his boss was also a woman, and I don't know, I never heard any complaints about like their level of authority that was related to their gender. It was always about their character or like the way they run things. So personally, to me, it makes no difference. I care more about like their character, their work ethic, and their competency overall.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with a lot of what you're saying. There is something that I did come across upon reading about some things in other subjects. There's a guy called Aaron Clarny, which people who've been watching the show for a while probably are familiar with the guy. He's written a few books. Bachelor Pad Economics, the Book of Numbers. There's several books he's written. And one of the things that he kind of is like a person who runs the stats when it comes to certain things pertaining to men and women. And one of the things that kind of came out in some of his research is that a lot of women who work for women often don't like having a woman boss. There's a type of camaraderie that happens between women that is not something that happens between men. And that camaraderie sometimes becomes a threat to the woman who is the boss. And so she gets excluded from the normal group, as it were. And so she is essentially fighting everyone else who's a woman for the authority that should be granted to her automatically based on the position. And men genuinely don't care who's the boss, because most men are focused on the goal or the task at hand. And so while men won't prefer one or the other because they're just like focusing on that, office politics often dictate certain squabbling that can happen for women. And we do know from the jobs report that predominantly women work in an office setting. And so that kind of dynamic is more likely to happen for women because of the types of professions they choose to work in. And women seem very happy with a male boss because there's not that fighting, because there's not that type of camaraderie that's normally there.
I find that really interesting, actually.
Yeah. His research was fascinating. I think a lot of it is credible from what I saw. But I mean, this, of course, there is going to be elements of it that are subjective, and so I wouldn't be like hold his word as gospel, you know. But I would say that
new Bible. Kidding.
Yeah. Oh my God. But I definitely think that his words are interesting, and I think that they deserve the attention to at least be observed and considered when coming to any sorts of thoughts about that. And ideas around it. So, I mean, if you end up running across it, or if anyone who's watching this comes across it, I mean, I think that's something to entertain when talking about that particular element of the question.
Yeah, I wonder how many factors can play into that as well. Because, for example, my boss is a woman, but she is older than me, and she is like different ethnicity, like different culture, and we don't talk much, so that I feel like that also kind of plays into the fact that like why I don't care as much, maybe because I'm younger. So, but I can imagine like maybe if you are kind of all the same age as your boss, and you're constantly working around and with each other, but like one of those people
Mhm.
is your boss. So then it's like, you know, trying to navigate, like kind of a camaraderie, like you said,
Mhm.
like that kind of like, group connection. But
Yeah.
also always keeping in mind that hey, they're still your boss at the end of the day.
Yeah, and here's the other thing too. There are also exceptions to every rule, And I think that I think at least the sentiment that I think that I'm just trying to convey, I think primarily speaks to like an office job. So this is like somebody who's going to be like dealing with emails, dealing with projects, dealing with presentations, management of people and organization and stuff along those lines. So, I mean, depending upon the setting is going to, I think, dictate a lot of the terms. And so I just was looking at it from that particular perspective. I'm not sure exactly what you do, and it's probably not really all that important. But when it comes to all of those things, everyone's situation is going to be different. This is more like just a general kind of thing, at least, and that's my idea. That's why I say I agree with a lot of what you said, and I do think it's interesting you bring up culture, because I think culture also plays a huge shape in the way in which we would view these things. Mm-hmm. So there's certain I put it this way: if certain demographics of people who were in a certain position were telling me what to do, this probably sounds a little racist, but I would 100% believe them based upon what we were doing. If I don't have a connection to that particular culture and they do, then I'm going to listen to what they have to say because they have more exposure to it. And I am going to innately trust the person who's the expert.
I'm not gonna Katie explain them. Well, actually, things won't run in your country. Why would I? Yeah, I would never do that either.
Yeah, you're this is how I do macaroni in my world. I'll throw it in the pot first. I'm no.
Right.
Sounds like somebody needs to get brained. Goodness gracious.
I know, right? We just need to go ahead and just open up the head, pull out the brain, put in a new brain in that's going to cause the thinking to happen.
Yeah, just need to get yours a little, jump start. Get him a new brain.
Yeah, new brain. All right. Well, I was going to wrap this up. I just want to say thank you very much, Katie, for coming on as a guest. I hope this has been fun. It's been fun for me. I hope we'll see you again soon. But yeah, do you have any final thoughts?
I mean, all I can say is I had fun, and I'm really glad I got invited. So thank you, Rose, and thank you, Justin.
Happy to have
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Wonderful. You're very welcome, and it's very wonderful to have you. All right, and for everyone else, I hope you guys had a great show, and this was fun. And if you have any questions, feel free to email the show at wickedparley@gmail.com. If you'd like to see any links or any sorts of articles that pertain to any of the talking points, we'd be happy to share them with you. And we'll see you all in the next one. Have a great night, everybody. Later.